Warning, this podcast has stories of real-life events and true crime that happens every day. These stories may contain adult language and graphic or disturbing details not suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
132 in Bush, I've got him at gunpoint. We're pulling them out.
10-1-1, advise ready for camp.
God!
Welcome to another episode of War Stories. I'm Chuck, and Tom is not here today. Tom is battling a cold or the coronavirus. That's what we think it is. He's not feeling well. He's at home recovering and recuperating. So it's just me today and our lovely guest, Pat. How you doing, Pat?
Good. How you doing, Chuck?
Good. So we had a chance to talk beforehand, and I understand you're a negotiator. You're also an author, well-established author, and you went to the FBI Academy.
Yeah. So 28 and a half years law enforcement, just retired in August. Mm-hmm. Of those 28 and a half years, I spent 20 as a negotiator. So that's kind of where I got a lot of my training, my knowledge, and just getting my feet wet in the negotiation world.
Wow, that's awesome. We like to start the show off. I know we're going to get into negotiating. We're going to get into the books, and we're going to get into your going to the FBI Academy, because that is really amazing, and not many people get to do that in law enforcement. So that's really cool. But kind of something we ask everybody who comes on. What was your driving factor to get into law enforcement? What caused you to go in that direction?
Yeah, so it was senior year high school. It's one of those things when you're a senior in high school, you really don't know what you want to do, right? So I was a football player. I had potentially had a football scholarship. I also had a lot of my family were military, so there was a military background. So I was kind of torn to, do I want to join the military? Do I want to go to college, play football? And then it just didn't really know what I wanted to do at that point. I thought about maybe being a coach, a history teacher, and be a football coach, that kind of thing. But at the time, my sister was dating a state trooper for Missouri State Highway Patrol. And he was one of those guys, like, bigger than life, like a big guy. He was a offensive lineman in college, just a big dude. And, the troopers, the big hats, they're just in. What was cool is he'd let me, and I don't think he was supposed to do this, but if I get in him trouble, it is what it is. I think he's retired now anyway, but he would let me do ride-alongs with them. So here I am, sitting in the cop car with him, and we would, like, it was like TV shows, right? Like crashes and helicopters landing, and I was just sucking it up, like, this is the coolest shit in the world. Like, I can't believe you do this for a job, and I just got sucked into the excitement and then just the helping, like, being on those calls to where it's not that great, but hey, we stopped a car, and it's a poor old lady broke down on the side of the road. Right. She's got a flat tire, nothing to have a spare. And he just basically, hey, we'll give you a ride and do all that. It was that stuff. It was great, the excitement stuff, but then it's just the helping the normal people thing. I think it really got me in. And just kind of like I said, a lot of different people in different services, nurses, doctors, all that stuff. So I just kind of felt that calling of what can you do for your community kind of thing. And then law enforcement was the thing. I ended up going to college, getting a criminal justice degree, and then went straight into the police academy.
Oh, wow. So you went to college first and did all that.
Yeah.
I'm assuming you got hired on at like 20 and a half or 21.
Yeah. So that was probably about 22. I think it was 22, 23 after I graduated, and then got in the police academy at that. It was a 6-month academy. So then kind of go from there. So.
Yeah. So 6-month academies. Oh man, I was dreading that when I got out of the Marine Corps, and I was like, God, it was 6-month academy.
Those are brutal. Yeah.
Oh. Was yours live-in?
No. So it was actually one of those ones where we could actually go home at night, but not like you really wanted to, though. At that point, you're so exhausted. Yeah. It was just like a zombie, you get up and go there, and then of course you had to do all the PT and all that stuff. And it was just, the course was easy. I mean, graduating college, I had a criminal justice degree, so it wasn't like the law and all that stuff. It was just the day after day after day crap of just like, oh, this is so brutal, and then just not knowing, like, when is this going to end? And then at the time, the police academy I went to, there weren't sponsors, so you put yourself to the academy and then applied for jobs.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So and this was late, middle 90s, I think 94, 95. 95 is when I graduated, but at the time jobs weren't that. It's not like today. Like, you could go to almost any police department right now because everybody's so short and hiring anybody. Right. But back then, I mean, you had to struggle to get a job. So that was just another thing that you had to look at. So
when you were, I assume you were a law enforcement officer out there in Missouri. Did they have a centralized academy for everybody in Missouri at that time to just go there and, since everyone's having to put themselves through it?
No, so there was a bunch of different ones. So there was two. So there was the St. Louis County one, St. Charles County one. Obviously, if you went hybrid patrol, they had their own academy. So I actually went to the St. Charles Academy, and that's the one with it. Basically, you kind of paid for your own way, and then got your accreditation, and then went job hunting. Is kind of what it was. So, and
that was 6 months long.
Yeah.
Wow. Because we have some stuff out in California where you can put yourself through an academy. I don't know, it's a national something or it's something, but you can put yourself through, pay your own way, and then apply out to agencies because you already have the post training and stuff like that. But it's not very long because they just do the basic post, and then that's like short and sweet, and you're done. And then you have to go and apply for jobs. And I think it's good for 1 or 2 years or something like that. And then if you don't get a job, you got to do it again, or hopefully get hired on by an agency. They put you through if it's after the time period.
Yeah.
But wow, that's a long academy to put yourself through and pay all that. Wow, that must have been pricey for the time. Jeez.
Yeah, and especially like just not knowing, like just okay. And you can tell a lot of guys, especially towards the end, because like once you get to a certain point, it's like okay, now you're pretty much post approved. You can go out job hunting. And then that's when a lot of guys are just like, hey, get a job wherever you can, kind of a thing. So
right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you don't want to waste that money that you just spent, Did they have any recruiters come in for agencies to kind of headhunt and be like, ooh, who's top of the class?
Yeah.
We can pick them up.
That's awesome. So there was a chance of, people would come in and then but what we found was, and this is always the big perplexing thing is like the places you really wanted to go, like, oh, I want to work for the county police department. But they're only hiring people with experience. So it's like, okay, well, wait a minute. So you got to go. So back in the day, you had to go to like some of these littler agencies to get experience to even get on with some of the bigger agencies. And that's what I ended up having to do. I had to work at a little agency because I always wanted to work for the county sheriff's department because I kind of grew up in the rural county, had a couple of sheriff's deputies live next to me, but that was like the place to work. But they weren't hiring you if you didn't have experience. So that's kind of the route you had to go. So.
Right. And so what agency did you start off at?
So I started off. I actually started as a reserve officer. I was an unpaid reserve officer, and you would just go in, do your time. Basically, you're a free employee, and you go and do your time, and then eventually, if you did good enough, you got hired. So I went in. I think it was February of '96. I ended up getting hired on April Fool's Day, April 1st, '96. I always thought that's like the worst April Fool's joke, right? So I ended up going full time at Lake St. Louis. I worked there for about 2 years. And then I went to work for the sheriff's department, St. Charles County Sheriff's Department. And the funny thing is I worked there for 2 years, and it was just like it wasn't the same. It was a huge department. Lake St. Louis, a little department. I think we had like 20, 30 officers. It was kind of like a family kind of environment.
Right.
Then I went to a big sheriff's department, and like you didn't know hardly anybody at the time. I think my sheriff was at the National Academy, so I didn't even get hired by him. I didn't know who he even was for the most part. So I had an opportunity to go back to Lake St. Louis 4 or 5 years later. I ended up going back to Lake St. Louis, and that's when I ended my career. So,
wow. And so when you started, that first 2 years, you were just a reserve officer, a post certified reserve officer.
No, just from February to April, I was a reserve officer. Then I got hired full time in April. Yeah,
got it.
But even back then, man, I think the first year I was making like maybe $20,000 a year or something crazy, and you're like,
back in
wow, that's good money, right? And you're like, holy crap, we could barely afford welfare at the time, but that's kind of what it was back in the mid '90s. Cops weren't making any kind of money at all.
No, I bet not. And you know what's crazy is that people are like, wow, that's really low, right? Compared to today's standards.
Right.
When I got hired on at my agency, I thought I was getting hired on at $60,000 a year. I actually was started at like 32,000, 35,000. I was like, what the heck? And I was starting to look back throughout like the history and stuff like that and see what cops were getting back in the 90s, the early 2000s. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, it wasn't good at all.
This is like being a cop, getting to pay back then, but having to live with wages. And I was like, oh my gosh.
Right.
So I can only imagine the struggles that you guys were dealing with at that time, because I struggled so much, and it was just, it was rough. And it almost made you question, is this something that I want to do? Is this something that I'm going to keep doing? And the ultimate thing in the back of my mind was constantly like, I want to help people. That's why I did this. It wasn't for the money. It would be great because if I die tomorrow, at least my family can be somewhat taken care of, but not with this amount of money.
Right.
But it was a rough grind, and I assume it was
And
probably
that's
rough
where
for
you can
too.
really see the guys who really wanted to do it, because
Yeah.
it wasn't for the money back then. It was because you loved the job, and you wanted to actually help people, and you wanted to do that.
Right.
And that's why, back then there's a little bit of turnover, because people finally realized, man, I've been doing this for 2 years. I ain't making any kind of money, and at the time there was no horizon to think like, oh, I'm actually going to make some decent money here at some time. That wasn't the case really in the late 90s, kind of going into the 2000s. Cops weren't making good money, just to be honest. So
no, and to be quite honest, in a lot of places they still aren't.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
It's just it's you're not doing it for the money. I mean, some agencies maybe you are, but for the most part you're not. And every time I've seen coppers you come in who want to do it for the money or for the benefits, they end up finding their way out of patrols very fast. They do like a year and a half, and then they're gone. You never see them again. You're like, where are they? So
Right.
it kind of tells. It's telling. But you went to college and you kind of got your degree, and you got your feet wet in law and stuff like that. Prior, did that help you when your first year on the job?
It didn't, because sometimes you get that mentality of, oh, I know the law, I know this stuff, and then there's actually like what I want to say street law, but how things work on the street. Even going through the academy, you get this 6 months of training. You think you know everything, but then you get in the door and you're just like, man, I have no clue. And it's funny because I remember some of the older guys. It was kind of one of those rules of, hey, listen, for the first 3 to 5 years, just kind of keep your mouth shut and learn everything you can, because you think you know stuff, but you don't have a clue. And I always kind of took that into, what, the more and more I thought about it, it's like, you know what, they're right, because every day was something different, and you learned and learned and learned. And like those first 3 to 5 years, you're just kind of soaking up, and you're like, holy crap, there's so much going on, and thinking that you knew stuff, and you just didn't. Looking back, you're just like, man, I was a dumb rookie. I had no clue of some of the stuff that was going on, so
100%. Yeah, and the crazy thing is, you're in the middle of the United States. You're in Missouri, right? I'm out here in California, and we had the same mentality. At 5 years, you stick in patrol, do what you got to do for the first 5 years. Keep your head down, your nose clean, your mouth shut, and just absorb everything. Because at the end of that 5 years, you're going to be proficient in everything. And by the time you get a call, you're not going to be nervous running into that call. You're just going to get to the call. You're going to know exactly what to do, and you're going to handle business because you absorbed all that information and you allowed the process to work. And I think it's great that people in different sides of the country have the same mentality and the same way of thinking. I think that's awesome. And I attribute that to just good leaders in law enforcement. And that's awesome.
Definitely.
Yeah. So when you got on in the late 90s and then the early 2000s, what was it like to be a cop during that time?
So I don't want to say it was like Wild Wild West, but it was my equivalent of kind of the Wild Wild West. Was a lot of things that were going on. Not to say that everything was kosher and everything, but it's kind of like those stories. Like, I remember back in the day, you could actually chase criminals, and you could take people into custody and use the necessary force you needed, and you were never questioned. Right. And it was kind of like that. It was like people knew, like, if you run from the cops, there was going to be consequences, and you know what, you would get taken to the ground. There'd be enough force taken, but you dust the guy off, and they knew it. It was fine. Hey, I'm a dumbass. I ran from the cops. I deserve to get a little bit of ass beaten on it. And not that we were beating people's asses all the time, but if you ran from the cop, you were going to get taken to the ground. You're going to get handcuffed, and that was the way it's going to be. Which is, and same with, pursuits. We used to, like, I mean, it didn't matter. Like, you stole a vehicle, man, we're pursuing that dude till the wheels fall off, right?
Absolutely.
And that's just, it was the mentality of criminals need to be caught and put away. And, if you commit a crime, that's your fault, kind of thing. And there was kind of like, I hate to say there was like a code, but there almost kind of was. Like, most of the criminals we dealt with realized once they got caught, okay, it show's over. I got to do what I got to do and move on. There wasn't a lot of, I want to say, disrespect towards law enforcement. There was some kind of a mutual respect for each other, I think, more than anything. And,
right.
I think as time went on, I saw that just gradually, like, just going away. Even the worst criminals, when you finally got them, they would listen to you and do what they had to do for the most part. They knew, okay, I'm caught, I'm not going to resist. I'm just going to take the handcuffs and go to jail, and that's it, kind of a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I saw that when I came on, and I guess we're still in the 2000s, so I wouldn't say it was still early 2000s, but it's not. It wasn't like 2000. It was 2012, and then coming on then and dealing with the OG gangsters and stuff like that and getting into scuffles with them, they wouldn't say anything. They're like, no, I'm not hurt. Even though you guys got into a little scuffle, they wouldn't say a word. And because you had a mutual respect, I'm doing bad guy shit, you're doing good guy shit, you just caught me.
Right.
It is what it is. And then I
Right.
started realizing the newer youngsters were coming out, and they were, starting putting in work and completely different mindset. And I was like, man, I like dealing with the older guys because, I could actually talk to them. I talked to some older guys who were, man, they had to have been, I talked to this one dude. He was probably in his late 40s, early 50s. So in gangster world, that's an OG. Like,
Right. Yeah.
that guy's been around the block. He's seen some stuff, and
Yeah.
he had the same complaints. He was like, man, these youngsters nowadays, they just don't get it, man. And they excuse my language, but they shit where they eat. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
they bring that stuff into the neighborhood, and they're doing bad things in the neighborhood, causing heat to come in the neighborhood and all this other stuff. They're like, nah, it's completely different mentality now. And I was like, wow. And I always used to love dealing with those guys and pick their brains. And it was awesome to kind of talk to those guys. Even though they're bad guys and they're gangsters and stuff like that,
Right.
but to just get that side of their psyche and everything, it really helps developing you as a law enforcement officer, police officer down the road. Did you get anything crazy your first, I guess, 2 years on the job at that first agency? Was there anything wild or fun that you got to do? Or
it's just one of those things. It's just some of the funny stories. I mean, it was funny because we used to have it wasn't necessarily a strip club, but it was an after hours bar where they had like the pasties and stuff. And it was a hole in the wall. I mean, literally it was a hole in the wall. It was big enough to where they had like a pool table and one stage. Right. And I remember it was one of those things where you would patrol it because you never knew what was coming out of there, drugs and everything else. Well, one night, it was probably midnight. I'm driving by and I see there's like a I don't know, box or something. And there looks like there's somebody perched on the box and they're peeking and they're like looking through the window. I'm like, that's just bizarre. What is that? So I whip around and pull out, and here it is. It's this 12-year-old kid, and he's staring through the windows trying to see the dancers. it's like 12 o'clock at night. So I stop. I'm like, hey man, what's going on? He's like, oh, nothing. I'm like, what were you doing? And he's trying to deny it,
Yeah.
I'm like, listen, man. I go, I know what you're trying to do. I go, dude, it's midnight. You're 12 years old. Your ass needs to be at home in bed. And, so I end up carting his ass, take him home. It's just one of those things where just told mom and dad, I'm like, hey, I caught him, walking down the street, not knowing what he was doing kind of thing. So kind of hopefully that he would kind of get the hint, hey, I got lucky on this one. So it's just kind of funny, different stories like that. You kind of throughout your career, you just remember it like those silly things. So.
Right. And that's probably another thing that you didn't learn in college. Using discretion with spirit of the law or letter of the law type of thing. And you definitely use spirit, and you're like, hey, instead of giving you a curfew violation, I'm gonna give you a stern talking to.
Yeah.
Like, I know what you're doing, laugh about it, and then take him home to his parents and be like, nah, he was just out walking so he doesn't get in trouble,
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And that's what I always tried to do, because I always felt like, when I was a kid, I got in a little, I wouldn't say trouble, but I was one of those kids that, we get caught, underage drinking, doing silly stuff like that. And we usually get a lot of breaks. So I always remembered that, if I caught, and I always put like, I stop at kids with beer in the car or something. And I ask them, okay, what do you guys do? What do you guys do in school? Oh, I'm doing wrestling. I'm doing this. It's like, hey, I get what you guys are trying to have fun, but this is big picture stuff, guys. This is stuff that ruins careers. You get a DUI, and guess what? You're probably going to get kicked off the wrestling team or get kicked off the football team. And underage drinking, all that stuff's going to happen. So that was what I always tried to do. It was something I had control over. And I thought, what, probably this isn't a good time for a ticket or enforcement. This is a good time, maybe life lesson of, hey, you know what, this is something you don't probably think at the time's a big deal, but the impact down the road it could have on you, and getting arrested for DUI or getting a minor in possession, that could come back to bite you at some time, and it could prevent you from doing other things and doing better things. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that. And, it's kind of like you were doing community policing before community policing became a thing, building those relationships within the community. You never know when you're going to get into a situation where you're going to have to pull on those people. Maybe you'll see someone that you were nice to, and an incident happened where a shooting happened or a stabbing happened or a robbery happened or a freaking murder happened. And you look around, you're like, oh, I know this person. They feel comfortable talking to you because you were nice. You gave them breaks. You showed them your personal side. You're human. And as community policing, before it's even cool, before they probably even coined the name community policing or made it popular, So that's awesome. That's really cool. And I got a question. Back in the day, you said bad guys and cops, they had an understanding, right? Do you think that there was less, I don't know, recidivism or less violent offenders then than there is now?
I was thinking about that too. And I think the other thing I thought of really was like almost back in the day, like it was almost unheard of to like kill a cop. Like that was like, there wasn't like, that was the line. Like if you cross that line, that's a big line to cross, and most people we ran into, they were the career criminals, but they weren't going to cross that line, and sometimes they did. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes whatever that may be, that maybe they're just that bad of a guy. Mm-hmm. But I think that's where the difference is nowadays to where you see some of these crimes and some of these like the officer ambushes and stuff where it's just like, what's the purpose of that? They just literally walked up on the cop and just killed him for absolutely no reason at all. So I think as far as like the disrespect of, most career criminals back then, that wasn't even a thing of theirs. Is like, I'm not going to kill a cop. I'm not going to go to jail or face the death penalty or that stupid stuff. Why would I do that? So I think that's kind of what's missing is now, like I said, nowadays it's just kind of like, all right, I killed a cop. What's the big deal? And shit, what's going to happen to me? Right.
Right. There was more consequences for action back then than there is now. And maybe criminals are more emboldened nowadays to commit violent crimes against authority figures.
Yeah, for sure.
That's sad. Man. And I kind of remember when I came on and I was, you didn't really hear too many. I mean, I came on during a time in California. Most people remember the Dorner situation. And that was the first time I had really heard about someone hunting down cops who used to be a cop, you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Hunting down people in his agency that he was a part of, and he had this big manifesto and it was just wild. And, that was an interesting time to come on the job during that. And I was like, what the heck? And then it kind of died down. And then some other things happened, like probably 5 years later. And then cops were getting followed home and murdered in their house, shot in their driveway. And I was like, oh my gosh. And working in a really crime-ridden neighborhood, we were always like looking over our shoulders. And it was to the point where at nighttime, when we would have downtime, we wouldn't go and sit in front of, a 7-Eleven or any type of location to give extra patrol. We would be either in a fire station in the back with their back against the wall, waiting for a call to come out, or we would be proactively looking for people in, bad locations and gang neighborhoods. Yeah. But even then, at a certain time when everyone's tied up, you're like, it's not the smart time to go out and be doing cowboy shit, Yeah. And it was a really interesting time. Did you guys ever have any times like that when you were on where you're almost, I guess, not afraid to do your job, but you were more weary of doing the job?
Yeah. So I think obviously, I think the turning point in the St. Louis area was Ferguson. After Ferguson, it was their dramatic change of just I don't know what it was, but like everybody in the community, just like certain people, you thought, man, that person would never say anything bad about the cops. The next thing you know, those are the people that are hating on the cops and railing on the cops, and it's just like, just the turn, and I don't want to say it was media driven, but I think media had a lot to do with it, of painting us all into that one picture of all cops are bad. Mm-hmm. You're going to walk out your door and a cop could potentially kill you. That's how bad it is. And it's like just the crap that was getting thrown about. I mean, and I think after that, I think policing in St. Louis changed a lot, just as far as a lot of guys were scared to do their jobs. What happens if I do get in that confrontation and I end up having to shoot and kill somebody? Are they going to prosecute me? Am I going to jail? Should I even defend myself? And there was a lot of incidents I saw. Yeah. So we were so the community we lived in is a very pro law enforcement community, and the county we live in is pretty pro law enforcement. But the community next door is kind of the opposite, So then you're kind of dealing, but the bleed over is always there, right? And the more it gets spun up, and the more people you start getting, more and more people starting to believe, oh, this is the way it is, kind of a thing, And it's just like, and then you really start debating, like, so why did I get into this profession where nobody likes you? You're trying to do your job. Nobody wants even you to show up anymore. I mean, there was a shift for a while, I think. And then I think it started to swing back a little bit. And then obviously we had, the Minnesota incident, the George Floyd incident, and that just kind of spun everything back up again. And it just kind of went from there. And I think we've been stuck in that spot of, okay, we need this. Eventually the pendulum needs this. And I'm not saying the pendulum needs to swing all the way to our side, right? As long as we keep it in the middle, that's all we're asking for. Good cops to do their work, And if you're a bad cop and you're doing something against the law, then you should be held accountable. But if you're a good cop and you're doing stuff that's righteous and the way it should be, then they should have that power and not be afraid to, take action and have to do things to save themselves and the community, instead of being feared of, oh crap, what if I do this? What's going to happen to me, kind of thing.
Yeah, agreed. It's a dangerous spot to be in right now because too many officers I see are afraid to do their job, and rightfully so. Like it's a scary time to be a cop because you don't know if your agency is going to have your back, even if you're in policy. You know, if they're going to try to hang you out to dry or try to make an example of you or say, well, this didn't look good on camera. Yeah, it might be within policy, but it's easier just to cut and run. And we'll give you a letter of recommendation, say you were a good cop, but just because of the optics and atmosphere, we decided to just, resign you or fire you. And that's kind of what I saw in the Ferguson thing where the copper he got into the altercation with the man and shot and killed him. It was a robbery. The robber came up to grab the officer's gun, and there's a fight over the gun, and he shoots him, and his DNA was even on the gun. And his agency, from what I heard, because I was on those riots the whole time, I was like, man, this is wild.
Yeah.
They just he was within policy, did everything right. I mean, there's probably some things that tactically maybe he could have done better, but it's any incident, and they just fired him or they let him go, and I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, and I think it's just one of those things where eventually, politics. Unfortunately, politics play a lot of roles in law enforcement. They're not supposed to, but in reality, it does. And it's always that, looking through that lens, what's it going to look like, kind of a thing. And at the end of the day, sometimes if it looks that bad, they'd rather just cut ways and hey, send you on your way than do the right thing of, hey, no, what this officer did was within policy. It's legal, it's justified, and sometimes use of force is ugly and it's bad, but at the end of the day, that was that subject's decision not to just comply, right?
Right. That's sad. I mean, he I think he made out okay. I mean, I think he made a couple million off of the GoFundMe. Now I don't know how much was taken or how much was given to him, but I saw that GoFundMe. And I was like, dang, dude, that was pretty good. But still, you lost your profession. You lost your sense of being. You lost a lot of stuff. I mean, that sucks. I can't imagine going through that. I mean, it's horrible. So after you left, you got hired on, you spent 2 years, and then you went to another agency before you got to the final destination spot, correct?
Yeah. So I actually started in one place. I started Lake St. Louis, went to the county, and then went back to Lake St. Louis. So it was like, I started over at the same place. So, but it was a different atmosphere. So assistant chief had left, the old assistant chief left, and that kind of helped. That's always one of the things. It's always funny though, like one supervisor can ruin a department or just have that effect to where, hey, I don't want to work here anymore, and sometimes that just happens. And it's just like, what's good, what's not. And I always wanted to work for a bigger agency, but then the more you start doing it, the more you start feeling like, okay, well then you kind of get lost a little bit. And it's like, okay, maybe I should just go to that smaller agency and find my niche and kind of go there. So
I agree. And I work for a big agency, but there's a lot of different divisions and things like that. I ended up getting not ran out. He caused me to want to leave. And I was like, I had a bad supervisor and I can't deal with him. He was just riding me and he was doing it for all the right reasons. I think he liked me, but he was causing me so much unneeded stress. I was like, I can't deal with you right now. And I left, and then he left, and then I was like, all right. And then I came back because where I'd went was so much. I mean, at the time, it wasn't a good spot to be in. Everyone was disgruntled, and I was like, man, this is not a good spot to be in. And rightfully so, they had every right to be disgruntled because of some stuff that was going down that I can't really talk about. But then I came back to that same area, and that's where I stayed, and I was like, I had the same contemplations. I was like, man, I should move around. I should do all this other stuff. And I was like, man, I really liked working with that people. I like the community. I know everybody. And I think that a good cop knows his area backwards, forward, knows all the players, knows everyone who lives in the houses, or for the most part, and things like that. So you had left, and then you came back, and is that when you became a negotiator?
No, so it was a couple of years later. So it's funny. So in the county, we had 3 different SWAT teams running around. There was a county one and 2 different police departments. And then around 2004, they decided, you know what? That's a lot of wasted resources. What if we combine things and make a multi-jurisdictional SWAT team, negotiation team, We already kind of had a multidisciplinary drug unit going on. So that was the theory. So in 2004, they came up with this idea to make this multi-jurisdictional thing. And it's funny because I always say I had to negotiate to get on the negotiation team because at the time, our agency only had one slot and they'd already given it to somebody. And I had gone to a couple different classes and I really thought, oh man, this is awesome. I really kind of want to get into this niche. And I found out there's only one slot. So I went to my chief. I'm like, hey, is there any way I can get on this team? I really want to do it. I actually paid my own way to go to this one training and he ended up like, okay, I'll let you go. So I had to like negotiate to get on the negotiation team. And then that's kind of how we started. So
that's awesome. And so you negotiate to get on the negotiation team. That's so fitting. That's awesome. And then, so you get the one spot, which is pretty impressive. And you get on the team and then, do they send you to, the FBI Academy after being there for a while, or how'd that happen?
No, so I'll have to separate the difference. So when you first start, you have to go to a 40-hour school. So I went to a 40-hour school, got my basic thing. So then there's so in Quantico, there's a 2-week school. So to be an FBI negotiator, you have to go to Quantico, and that's where they send their agents. Well, they also have like five or 6 slots for local law enforcement, which includes international people. So I had heard about that. And it was kind of like that unicorn. Like nobody knew how do you get into this class or what do you do? You know, it was one of those mysticism things. And so I'd asked a bunch of people, never heard anything. So it's funny. So I would say probably around, I'm trying to think, it was 2011. One of the things I noticed was just training. Like training's expensive. Training's hard to come by. We were kind of in the middle of Missouri. There wasn't a lot of places for us to get good negotiation training. We either had to go to California, Texas, Florida. So me and a couple of my friends actually created the Missouri Association of Negotiators. So we wanted to create our own association and bring these people here. And hey, look, why not? We have Missouri. So we kind of started doing that. We started that in 2011. Awesome. It was basically 2 of us and our credit cards. And I thought my wife was going to divorce me and all that stuff, but we managed, we survived. So we started building that up and we started doing conferences, and then we started doing this thing. It's called a Negotiator Challenge. And what we would do is we would bring teams across the state and build up scenarios and have them run these scenarios. And then you would get judged. And at the end of the day, whoever won kind of got a trophy and thing. But we were lucky enough to one year we got a terminal in Kansas City Airport. So we ran a scenario on, hey, this guy's going to the terminal. He finds out his wife is cheating on him. He goes to confront her in the baggage claim area and then ends up pulling her hostage. That's kind of the scenario.
Right.
So it was kind of a cool scenario. We were running it. Well, one of the big wigs from the FBI was down, and he was just happened to be there, and he's watching. He's like, "Oh, this is great. This is awesome." And they're like, "Hey, yeah, well, you should come meet the guy who kind of started this thing up." And he came over and started talking to me. I'm like, "Yeah, I'm Pat. I was one of the guys who started the association. We're big and wanting to get this thing started." He goes, "That's awesome. I really want you to come out and go to our 2-week course." And I'm like, "What?" And he's like, "Yeah." He goes, "I'll let you know." So I'm thinking, "Oh, this is great." And like a month later, I get an email, "Hey, you have 2 months to show up at Quantico to do the 2-week course." So I'm like, "Hell yeah, I'll go." So that was a pretty interesting course because, like I said, you had the FBI agents, but then we also had international people. So we had two guys from London, we had a guy from Australia, a guy from New Zealand, and a guy from Germany, and then we had a couple local cops there too. So it was just kind of cool, just learning like all the different things in different areas of the world. And at the end of the day, cops are cops. We all have the same problems, we're dealing with domestics or we're dealing with that. It's just funny how like it doesn't matter where you are in the country or the world. A lot of times cop deals with the same things, and it's just kind of funny just how that plays out.
Yep. It's all the same stuff, just different locations.
Yeah.
See the man, see the woman, people are people.
Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't matter where you're at. People are going to be people. Yeah. Dang. So you became a negotiator, and then because there wasn't a lot of schools and you would have to travel, you created your own freaking basically school. And then just so by happenstance, like FBI guy comes down and sees it and is like, "Hey, you should come and do this."
Yeah. That's pretty much it. Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. It was pretty cool. And then what was really even cooler than that was, so in the 2 weeks course, you had that one weekend. So all the agents would go home, with the local guys, we're all from out of town, and all the internationals are all there. So during the weekend, we all went to DC and just hung out and got to, get to know each other and just kind of, sit at the bars, have a beer and whatnot. So it was pretty cool. At the end of that, one of the guys from England approached me. He's like, "Hey, Pat, I just want to thank you for, you didn't have to take us around. You did all this stuff. If you ever want to come to our school in London, you have an open invitation." And I was like, "Heck yeah." So about a year later, his name was Peter. He was getting ready to retire. And he's like, "Hey, man, I'm getting ready to retire, but I want to cash in that promise." So I got to go to London and went to the London Met. It's the London Met Scotland Yard 2-week course, and went over there to their negotiation course. And it was really cool because just the way, the English deal with it, because obviously they don't have the gun problems we do, but,
Right.
The knives, edge weapons, all that stuff. I mean, it's just a whole different kind of world. But then they have a lot of like kidnappings and terrorist stuff there too. So it's just like, it was kind of just cool seeing how they dealt with different things. So
What do they attribute all the terrorist activities to out there? I'm just curious.
I think it's just because it's kind of like London's kind of like the hub for everything. I'm like, just talk about all the different, like, I thought New York City was kind of like the big thing, but man, London, I think is even more just all the different cultural and international things and I think it's just like I want to say melting pot kind of all these different people. And I think it's easier to get access to things, to where, it's not like New York City. I mean, New York City, man, there's cops almost on every street corner, right? Sometimes you go to London and you don't see as much of the police presence. I don't know. I mean, that's just me kind of ballparking it, but
I wonder if that's because they have all the cameras that like facial recognition and stuff, Yeah, New York is a wild beast. I mean, I went to New York one time in high school and like you said, cops are everywhere. I have family who's NYPD and stuff like that. My cousin JJ, he was a lieutenant, then he was a captain. I think he retired as a captain, but it was just crazy. We walked into one of the Joe's famous pieces, not the one in the village, but it's some random one. And we're walking in, and as we walk out, we heard some banging on the inside. I'm like, what the heck is going on outside? And I guess all the apartments are upstairs, and the ESU team was outside, and we come out and they were doing a freaking raid on a house right above us as we're eating. I was like, this is wild.
Yeah.
So you got to do a lot of really cool things, after getting in, creating your own negotiation school. Like that's pretty awesome. And then you got all these networkings that are happening and you're getting access to do all these cool things. That's really awesome. But I do have one question as a negotiator. What's the hardest thing to do? Because negotiating is tough. I've seen it on SWAT call outs and things like that. And it's like, it takes them forever and it's a long and tedious process. So what is the hardest thing that you've had to deal with as a negotiator?
I think one of the harder things is just realizing like it's one of the one times we're in law enforcement, we really aren't in control of the situation.
Right.
That person who's in, whether they're in a crisis or they're the hostage taker, they actually have all the control. There's things we can do to, manipulate it sometimes. But at the end of the day, if that guy decides, you know what, I'm suicidal, I'm going to kill myself, or you know what, I think I'm going to take a couple hostages out. There's not a lot we can do about that. And that's one of the harder things when we call them going bad. If that person does decide to take their life or something does happen and it forces, those are tough to deal with because you always kind of second guess, tactics and what you said or what could have happened. But the reality is at the end of the day, that person's kind of really in charge. And it's hard to deal with when in law enforcement, we're used to kind of always being in charge and setting the tone and doing things. So,
right. So just like letting go of some of that control is probably like what you said is the hardest thing to deal with because we're used to being in control. Oh, wow. Wow. That must be difficult. I went to some peer support training and I became a licensed peer support counselor for my agency and stuff like that, vet to vet, all this type of stuff. And they would actually sometimes use us to go and do some negotiating. I never got to do it, but with cops that were having a hard time and struggling and things like that and bring us in to talk to some of these people. And I always thought that was cool. I was like, man, maybe I can get my way into negotiate, and it never happened. But I always thought it was
similar stuff they teach in peer support is some of the things we teach too in negotiation, because it's similar too, especially if you have some of those cops in crisis. They're dealing with some of the same things people in crisis are dealing with too. So
then what do you think makes a great negotiator?
So I think one of the funniest things, because it was funny, because when we would do like selections, one of the questions we'd always ask, well, why do you think you'd be a good negotiator? And it would never fail. Almost always somebody would say, well, I'm a good talker. And we'd have to be like, okay, that's great. But here's the thing. As a negotiator, you had to be a better listener than a talker. And
Right.
what we find is the good negotiators really don't talk a lot. They know when to talk and when not to talk. And it's just being that good listener. And it's funny because you see all these classes for how to become a better public speaker, how to speak, all this stuff. There's not a lot of classes on how to be a good listener, right?
Right.
So that's one of those things that it's one of those niches you had to pick up on. And the thing is, and it's not like the movies either. Like you always see the movies, you see this like the one guy, he's the negotiator and he's doing this stuff and all this great. Well, there's actually a big team around him, and you have to be a team player. Our team, you can't have egos. Anybody that has an ego really doesn't last long in the negotiation team. You have to be humble. You have to have no egos, and you have to just work well as a team. You know, you're not always going to be the we call him primary, the talker. You may be doing other chores. You know, you may just be going and getting the coffee, keeping everybody satisfied. But that's part of the team, and it makes what makes the team work. And I think that's the biggest thing is just being humble and then being a good listener.
Wow. That's great. And like empathizing and things like
Yeah.
that is probably what really helps too, empathizing with the people that are out there struggling and in crisis. That's wow. And our negotiators, because they would come out on SWAT calls, and that's the only time I've ever seen them. And it was one dude. That was
Really?
it.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember it. He came in and this guy kept his supposedly had his wife hostage or something like that, and she ended up not being there. I guess she ran away, or I don't know what happened, but we're stacked up on the house. We get relieved by SWAT. We ended up go setting up around the corner, contain, go take a spot in the containment, and then SWAT. We just because they come in, they take the containment, and then we start taking them off one by one, and they come in, and then they form their stick, and then they start talking to this guy. And yeah, it was just one guy in a Hawaiian t-shirt, just like something that you'd see out of like Lethal Weapon. I was like, Reese, is that you? Like, what is going on? And yeah, just straight like surfer. Looked like he just came from the beach, and it worked, and he got him out. But I was like, wow, it's crazy. So you guys were a team. Our guys was one dude.
Yeah,
I like the
so
team aspect better.
Yeah, we usually have like six or seven on a call out and what's funny is like you think that's a lot, but when you start putting bodies in, so normally we'll automatically throw 2 of our negotiators in armored vehicle because what we found is most people don't want to talk to us. So we got to forward them out so they can start loud hailing and get some kind of communication. So right there, we just lost 2 bodies, just trying to get some kind of communication. So sometimes you think, oh, 7's a good number. And sometimes you're doing so many different jobs that it just eats those numbers up pretty quickly. So,
right. What was one of the, because you're a negotiator for most of your career, what was one of the toughest negotiations you ever had to deal with?
So we had a couple bizarre ones, but this one was interesting just because it's one of those guys. He was doing a bunch of different robberies. He was doing some burglaries and whatnot. Broke into a vet clinic. And this is all middle of the night. So patrols kind of getting wind of there's something going on. They end up catching him pretty early in the morning. They get in a foot pursuit. He ends up running in this open garage and runs in this back bedroom of this house. There's a boyfriend, girlfriend. And for some reason, the boyfriend beats feet and leaves his girlfriend in there. And then this dude goes in and takes her hostage. And it's just one of those things. It was like the craziness of it is, so the next bedroom over actually had 3 little girls. I think it was 9, 6, and 3 were in that room. So if he would have went left and went in that room, I couldn't even imagine having to deal with that. And then there was like a teenage sleepover in a different room. So it was like, there was total of like 10 people in this house, and how it didn't become, but it was bad enough. So now he goes in there and takes her hostage. And it's just one of those things like, okay, this is like the most random hostage taking I think I've ever been a part of. Usually there's something to it, but this one was just right. He runs in this back bedroom. Now he's got this chick hostage. We knew he had a knife. Then he starts yelling. He's got a Glock and he's going to start shooting everybody. And it was just one of those things to where right off the bat, he had this one demand was he wanted to talk to his girlfriend. And that's always kind of like that red flag of, okay, why does he want to talk to his girlfriend? Is this one of those, hey, yeah, I'm caught. I did some bad stuff. I love you, bam, kind of a thing, or kill the hostage, kill himself. So that's just one of those hairy situations to where you really don't know what's really going on. At the end of the day, we end up getting her out and him out, but it was just one of those things to where, like, worst case scenario, you're always thinking like, man, what happens if he ends up, because the other thing was it didn't really sink, but he had gone in this bedroom door and he had just put a dresser up against it. But when the first cops got there, I mean, there were some dudes, and it's all on body cam, and there were some dudes trying to knock this door down, and these were big dudes, and that door was not budging. So, if we were like, oh crap, but something happens and they got to do hostage rescue, how the heck are they getting in that door? So that was one of the big fears too, is just like, man, he's barricaded good too. So, but it's some of those situations where you're like thinking like worst case scenario, and even when it turns out, you're like, oh man, wow, we got lucky, or what was it, right? So.
Right. Wow. Now, did you ever have any that just didn't go your way and you were just like, man?
Yeah. So we had a something a little different. This one guy, literally, he goes to his ex-girlfriend, but he's one of those guys who I think more than an ex-girlfriend. And she was just like, I went out with him a couple times, and it's not like we were a thing, but
right.
He thought they were. So he goes to her place of work, which is urgent care, basically tells everybody get out, and then goes in her office and holds her hostage. But the thing we didn't know was he had her call her sons and basically tell her sons goodbye. Hey, so-and-so's holding me hostage. He says he's going to kill me. Please make sure you graduate from high school. So she's doing that stuff. And this is something that happened. I mean, I think it only lasted like 30 minutes by the time we got there. We're trying to communicate with them. There's nothing going on. And she does what a hostage does. She tries to get away, and he ends up shooting her. And shoots her. She falls down. We get her out, and she ended up dying. But then, SWAT ended up having to take him out too. But it's just one of those ones where like it happened so fast, but like the worst possible outcomes. The hostage ended up getting killed. We ended up having to kill the suspect, and it's just like, man, it's just one of those things. But again, at the end of the day, he's the guy who kind of started the whole thing. So if there's anybody to blame, it's that dude, right? So,
right, and I have to assume there's probably some aspect of I guess survivor's guilt or things like that kind of happen with negotiators when things go out, because you have to relinquish control basically. You're just trying to negotiate with them to try to get them to put the gun down, put the knife down, let the hostage go, have a peaceful outcome. Is there any of that happens, and how do you move on from that? And what's some of the techniques that you use?
Yeah, so it just kind of goes back to one we had not too long ago. So this guy had just killed his girlfriend. He shot his girlfriend, killed his girlfriend. He ended up saying he was going to turn himself in, goes all the way to the other side of the county, ends up stopping at this gas station, and now he's barricaded in his vehicle. So he's got the shotgun in his car. He's outside the car, kind of standing shotgun near, and now we're negotiating with him. At the end of the day, he ended up shooting himself and killing himself. And it's just one of those things to where, like, we were just so frustrated with the fact of all you had to do was step away from the car, get away from the shotgun. Yeah, you killed your girlfriend. I mean, that's probably the worst you can do, but now you killed yourself too. And it's just like, there were several times where we thought, okay, we're making some progress here. We might be able to do something. But at the end of the day, he decided to do that. And it's just the fact of having other people on your team knowing, hey, okay, this wasn't a good one, sitting around talking about it, discussing it. And then just realize, like I said, at the end of the day, that was that guy's decision. We gave him every opportunity to come surrender, and he just didn't, So, I mean, that's the only thing. Like I said, you still question yourself, like, what could we have done different tactically wise? Could we have done something to get him away from that car? Could we have moved the armored cars closer in? What could we have done differently, kind of a thing? Because I mean, you could do that all day long, and it's really not going to help you figure out the situation out. It's just the fact that what, that was his decision, and it sucked, but it is what it is, kind of a thing.
Right. And I guess if you start what ifing it, you start to spiral, and that's not good. And you start to relive it. And I think a good debrief with your guys is really good. And I think that's great advice. I mean, definitely debriefing and talking and coming to the conclusion that the ball was in his court and he did this. There's nothing that we could have done differently.
Yeah.
And, as a negotiator, I've seen, or not as a negotiator, but as watching negotiators and being on the job, and I've seen, the closest I've ever seen a negotiator get is in like an armored personnel vehicle, like a Bearcat or something, like right in front of the house. Is there any incidents where you have to get a lot closer, or is it pretty much you stay in an armored vehicle if you have to get that close and that's it?
Yeah, so it just depends on the situation. Like jumpers are going to be something to where you probably get close enough to. Most of those, we're assuming they're unarmed, so we're not really putting ourselves in danger. But there has been times like the one I just told about, the hospital one. We were literally had our TAC team set up behind the door of the office, and our negotiator was in the stack trying to communicate through that door. Now we were there. Obviously, we had all of our shields and whatnot, but we were close enough just because voice to voice was the only way we could communicate. They weren't answering the phone. They weren't talking. So we had to get somebody up front. So that's usually what we'll have to do is we'll put somebody up front Now we're still behind cover. We're still, we're not going to be out in the open and all that stuff. But sometimes we have to do that because that may be the only way we can communicate. So.
Has there ever been incidences where it got kinetic real fast and now the negotiator, because you're still a law enforcement, you're still a cop, is now part of the stick that has to go in? Or do they step out and they're just like, nope.
Yeah. Our rule was we would just roll one way. Like if we know it's going, we're just getting the hell out of the way and letting the operators go and take care of business. So that was something we kind of would train is, okay,
Got it.
we're here now, but we're just communicating. At the end of the day, we're rolling out of the way because most of us, all we have is just a helmet and a heavy vest. We don't have all the stuff the tech guys have, right? We'll have a pistol with us, but at the end of the day, it's better for us to just roll out and have them go in and take care of business because that's what they do. So let them do that, and we're just getting the hell out of the way at that point. So,
right now, we talked about some pretty heavy stuff. Just now. Was there any really funny kind of start to close out? Was there any funny negotiating that you were a part of? That it ended up in just laughs or because someone did something stupid, like the suspect did something stupid or anything like that?
Yeah.
Or were they all pretty much really serious?
No, there's a couple. So actually there's this one, it started off bad. The guy pistol whips his wife. Now his wife got out, thankfully.
Mm-hmm.
But now he's barricaded in the basement. So one of the things we have to do is we have to start, getting people out of the houses that are surrounded because this guy he had access to weapons like rifles and whatnot. And it was a really cold night. So we part of the thing we were in the Bearcat, getting rid of the neighbors, and we pull up into this one neighbor's house, and it's this older lady. I'd say she's probably in her 80s. So we open the back of the armored vehicle, and we're getting her in there. She gets in, and she's sitting down. Next thing you know, she's grabbing her purse. She's like, "Would you guys like a glass of wine?" And we're like, "What?" And she literally pulls out this wine bottle and these 2 glasses, and she's starting to pour everybody some wine.
What?
like she's just having like the time of her life. She's riding the back of this armored car. We're transporting her to safety, and it's just like it's one of those crazy things where we're like, "This is crazy." So we end up getting her saved, and then we're end up dealing with the suspects. So.
Wait, hold on. She brought a travel wine with her. She's like, "I'm getting out of here. This is stressful."
In her purse she had a bottle of wine and glasses, so she was prepared for the long haul. I guess I don't know.
My god!
And the reason I remember this is because her name was Rose. Because I always think of Titanic, and it's like her name was Rose, and every now and then we'll go back. I can't remember Rose. She was wanting to give us some wine and stuff, and it's just one of those crazy things. Well, then we get to the negotiation part. So we're out here, we're loud hailing this dude, and like they throw a flashbang on his front porch. Nothing. I mean, nothing's getting this guy's attention. So I'm in the front, and they're like, "All right, we're gonna put our breacher, our big thing on the Bearcat, and we're gonna breach the front door, and then work that." So I'm like, "Oh, this is gonna be awesome. We're gonna pop the front door and all that." Just as they're getting ready to break the door, this dude comes up, and it reminded me of like Kramer from Seinfeld. Just like stumbling up to the front door, and it's like, "What's going on?" We're like, "What the hell?" And he comes out, he's just hammered drunk. I mean, you can smell the alcohol. And we're like, "Dude, we've been outside your house for 3 hours. We throwed flashbangs." "Well, I didn't know it was even going on." It's like, whatever, dude. I think he was just so drunk. He was just oblivious to the whole thing. It's just one of those crazy incidents. You're like, what the heck, man? It's just crazy. So
that's funny. Well, I mean, it sounds like you had a pretty illustrious career as a negotiator, and you have some great stories. I mean, that's wild. And I understand that you wrote 3 books and then had a bunch of articles published.
Yeah. So it's funny. So I'll tell you how I got into my first book. So one of the things we do when we do these conferences is we call them case studies, and we'll put like my incident I talked about, we'll do a case study of it and show, hey, this is what's good, this is what's bad, so other negotiators can learn from that. So I just so happened to be in Illinois at one of these conferences, and we were in the hospitality room having a couple drinks, and I ran into a Chicago PD guy, and we were just kind of shooting the shit. And he's like, "Hey, you from St. Louis?" I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "Hey, you know the movie The Negotiator?" I'm like, "Yeah, the one with Samuel Jackson." He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "You know that's based out of Chicago, but it's a true story that happened in St. Louis." And I'm like, "What? Get out of here!" I had not known that. I lived in St. Louis my whole life. I'm like, "Are you for sure?" He's like, "Yeah, I promise." So I go back home, and I'm just Googling the crap out of this, and sure enough, I find out like, yeah, it's based off an incident that happened in 1988 in the city of St. Louis. A St. Louis city officer takes a police commissioner hostage, and you start looking at this stuff. So I was like, dude, I'm fascinated. So I'm starting to research this. So I end up finding the original negotiator who negotiated it, and he kind of is like, he was like in his 80s at the time, so he didn't really have a good recollection. But he started pointing me to different people. So I ended up finding, so the guy who was held hostage, he was a police commissioner, but he was also a lawyer. Well, his son was a city copper at the time. So I ended up tracking down his son, and then his other son was a lawyer at the time too. So I ended up tracking those two guys down, and then just started putting pieces together. And then I'll say the Samuel Jackson character, because that's who it was. He ended up getting federally indicted and ended up getting put in prison for all this incident, but he's out now. But one of the guys I had worked with, his son actually knew that guy's son, and they actually lived down the street from him. And he's like, "Hey, I know this guy. I know him. If you want me to ask him on Facebook and he'll come talk to you," I'm like, "Yeah, absolutely." So I ended up getting hooked up with the suspect, and then next thing I know, I'm interviewing him. And then I put together, it's basically the case study of the real story of the Negotiator movie. And that led me to, I found the guy who started St. Louis City's negotiation team back in the early 70s. So I interviewed that guy, and I was like, "Man, that's really cool. I wish I could find more guys like that." And that's kind of what my first book, it's called Crisis Cops. That's what I did. I ended up finding,
Wow.
So I ended up talking to Frank Bowles from New York. He was the first negotiator. Him and Harvey Schlossberg, New York City started negotiations in the 70s. So I interviewed them. I talked to a couple LAPD guys from back in the 70s who started that stuff, San Francisco. So each chapter is a different agency, and it's like the OG negotiators, from the early 70s, how they started. So that was my first book. And then my second book, I kind of went
cool.
I went to the 80s and kind of looked at the 80s, and then went to that. So those are my first two books. And then, like I said, I just recently retired, so I finally wrote kind of my stories on my last one. So
nice. What's the name of that book?
So that one's Call Me in the Chaos.
Wow.
Yeah.
And if people want to find any of these books, where can they get them at?
Yeah, so all three of them are on Amazon. You can get them on Kindle, you can get them on Audible, or you can get the hard copy if you're into hard copy stuff. But yeah, Amazon has all three of them. So.
Wow, that's awesome. So go to Amazon if you want to see these books or you want to get them. I'm really intrigued with the first two books, those case studies, and that last one. Wow, that's just reading your story through your life. That's awesome. That's really cool. I'm sorry. Hold on one second. Okay, so yeah, if you want to check out those books, go to Amazon. 3 books. They sound amazing. Two of the first are case studies, and then the last one's just your career as a negotiator. I think that's awesome. As we get ready to close the show out, we always give the guests a chance to dedicate an episode to a fallen brother or sister. I understand that you do have a dedication, and then I'll tee up on that at the end.
Yeah, so it's for Blake Snyder, St. Louis County Police Department.
Yeah, and Blake Curtis Snyder, police officer Blake Snyder, was shot and killed while responding to a disturbance on the 10,700 block of Arno Drive in Green Park, Missouri, shortly after 5 a.m. He and another officer had arrived at the scene and were met with gunfire immediately. As they exited their patrol cars, Officer Snyder was shot at point-blank range and killed instantly. The second officer was able to return fire, wounding the subject. The man who murdered Officer Snyder was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Officer Snyder had served at the St. Louis County Police Department for 4 years. He is survived by his wife and 2-year-old son. In November 2016, Clydesdale Park was renamed Officer Blake C. Snyder Park in his honor. Additionally, in August 2018, I-30 between Highway 21 and Highway P was renamed Officer Snyder Memorial Highway. He was 33 years old, had a tour of 4 years, and his badge number is 4153. Rest easy, brother. We've got it from here. Wow. Well, I just want to say thank you so much, Pat, for coming on today. It was a pleasure. I think that your stories are awesome. Being a negotiator, that's so cool. And just starting your own negotiating school, and then getting to go to the FBI 2-week training course, and then getting to go to London and doing a 2-week training course out there. That is freaking amazing. And then you're well-accomplished author. Again, go check him out on Amazon. Where else can people find you if they want to get in contact with you?
So I'm actually, my website should be coming up pretty soon. It's crisiscop.com. It's going to have all kinds of things. I didn't mention this, but I actually was able to get a TED Talk too. So I just did a TED Talk last year in May, and obviously it's all on negotiation stuff. So, but I'm going to have some videos, stuff like that. Like I said, big into training. I love doing the training. It's one of those things that my mentor shared with me is it's no good if I have all this knowledge. It's a lot better if I spread this knowledge and then make a force multiplier. And then hopefully everybody just kind of continues that and makes it better. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, that's awesome. A TED Talk. That's so cool. Well, Pat, I want to say thank you so much for coming on. If you want to check him out, be sure to stay tuned for his website. Check him out on Amazon. And thank you all for today for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to follow us on Instagram at war_stories_official and our Facebook at War Stories Podcast. If you're already following, we really appreciate it if you could share a post and help spread the word. You can also check out the link in our bio on both platforms to find all of our social media, our media links, and website. Our podcast is available on all major streaming platforms, including YouTube. If you'd like to support us, head over to our website at www.warstoriesofficial.com. Grab some gear. We're running out. We still have some stuff available, but be sure to go there and grab some stuff if you want to support us. And then once those sell out, we're going to come up with some new stuff. Do you have a story to tell, or you know someone who does? We're always looking for law enforcement, veterans, corrections officers, dispatchers, firefighters, medics, ER docs, and ER nurses to feature on the show. If you're interested, email us at booking.warstories@gmail.com, and I'll get you in touch with our producer, Dylan. Or go to linkedin.com, War Stories Podcast, and you can link up with Dylan there. And you can share your story. We'd love to have you on. And if you know someone who'd be a great fit, please send them our way. Also, check us out on TikTok at www.tiktok.com, as well as all of our other socials. Thanks again for the support. Stay safe. And until our next episode, come home with your shield or on it.